My father gave my childhood bedroom to my sister and slipped me a 20 for a cab. 3 years later, I signed away $380 million, not to him, not to them, but to every woman who's ever been erased by her own blood. I'm Vivian Prescott, and this isn't a story about revenge. This is a story about remembering who you are and never handing it back. Stay with me, because in Chapter 5 you'll hear the one sentence that made me stop being their daughter for good. The wheels of my carry-on clicked softly against the cracked stone walkway as I pulled it up to the familiar white house on Pine Hill Drive. It looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just gotten used to wide glass walls and sleek lobby elevators. But this was the house I grew up in. The porch still sagged slightly on the left. The gutters were clogged. The wind chimes my mom bought from the church bazaar in '98 still hung by a single thread. The porch light was off. I stood beneath the shadows of the front awning holding my breath. It had been 3 years. No calls, no emails, not even a holiday card. I told myself I stayed away because I was busy launches rounds of funding board meetings, but deep down I knew it was something else. The kind of silence that builds not from forgetting but from not wanting to remember. I rang the doorbell once. Then again, a shuffle inside. Footsteps. Slippers dragging against wood. The door creaked open halfway. My father, Charles Prescott, appeared. He looked older than I remembered, hair thinner, face a little more sunken. But the expression on his face hadn't changed. "Vivian," he said like he was confirming it for himself. "Hey, Dad." I smiled, a little unsure of what kind of welcome I'd get, still hoping it might surprise me. "I was in town for a few days. Thought I'd stop by, maybe stay the night if that's okay." He didn't move. The door remained at that same cautious halfway angle, like he wasn't ready to decide yet if I was guest or threat. "You should have called," he muttered. "I wasn't sure you'd answer." He looked past me at the dark driveway, maybe expecting someone else to be standing behind me. Then he stepped away from the door briefly. I thought he was going to open it. Instead, he came back with something crumpled in his hand. A 20 and a 5. He extended it out to me. "Take this. Cab stands just 2 blocks down." I stared at the bills for a full 5 seconds thinking it was a joke. Then I realized it wasn't. "Dad, I'm not asking for much. I thought I could sleep here tonight." "Your room's gone," he said flatly. "Sierra moved in 6 months ago. We don't have space anymore." "She's 30, I said before I could stop myself. "She doesn't have a job, but she's got her old room." He shrugged like that explained everything. "She needed help, that's what family does." The irony hung between us like fog. I've been helping myself since I was 19. I never asked for anything. Not even when I had $70 to my name and was coding in the back room of a laundromat. He didn't respond. His eyes had that same tired, hollow look they used to get when I'd try to explain why I deserved the same support Sierra got. It was easier for him to pretend he didn't hear. I shifted my suitcase slightly. "Look, I didn't come here to fight. I just wanted to see you and Mom. Maybe have a meal. Say hi. I'm not trying to move in." He sighed, and for a second I thought he might give in. But instead he said, "It's late, we've got an early morning. Your mother's tired." I leaned slightly to the side, trying to get a glimpse inside. The living room was dim, but I could see my mom sitting on the couch, her arms folded, eyes fixed on the television. She didn't turn her head. Not even when I called out, "Mom." No response. Not even a flinch. It was like I didn't exist. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. My suitcase suddenly felt heavier. My coat thinner. I wrapped my fingers tighter around the handle. "You know, I've had this conversation in my head 100 times, I said quietly. "Sometimes you cried and told me you missed me. Sometimes Mom hugged me and said she was sorry. But not once did I picture you handing me $25 like I was a cab driver you didn't remember calling." He looked down at the money still in his hand. Then, without a word, he placed it on the porch railing. "Take care of yourself, Vivian." The door shut. No bang. Just a soft click followed by the deadbolt sliding into place. I stood there, breath misting in the cold, watching the lights flicker behind the closed curtains. Somewhere inside, the dishwasher hummed to life. I wasn't sure how long I stood there. The chill crept into my shoes, my fingers ached. But I stayed until my chest stopped burning. Eventually, I picked up the money and shoved it into my coat pocket. I turned away from the house, dragging my suitcase back toward the street. The wheels scraped against the pavement, catching on a crack, jerking my arm back. I didn't stop. Halfway down the block, I paused under the flickering glow of a street lamp. My breath came out in clouds. I turned around, looking back. That house, peeling paint, sagging porch, dead rose bushes out front, used to be my entire world. Now it wasn't even a place I could rest for one night. I pulled out my phone. I could call Ethan. He'd answer. He always did. But the idea of explaining this, of saying it out loud, felt like pouring salt into a fresh wound. Instead, I opened my rideshare app and requested a pickup. Estimated time 8 minutes. I sat down on the curb, my suitcase beside me, staring at the screen. My reflection looked tired. Older. But not broken. I had built $1 billion company from scratch, raised 3 funding rounds, hired 200 employees, built products that saved lives. I'd been in Wired, Forbes, TechCrunch. And yet my father had handed me cab fare like I was a stranger he couldn't place. Maybe I was. Maybe I always had been. When the car pulled up, I stood, brushed the dirt off my coat, and stepped inside. I didn't look back. The car's heater blasted against my legs, thawing the cold that had crept into my bones. I gave the driver an address to a hotel near downtown and leaned my head back against the seat. My throat felt dry, my eyes heavier than I wanted to admit. The silence inside the car pressed in on me, and before long it stirred up memories I thought I'd boxed away years ago. I was 9 the first time I noticed things didn't feel fair. Sierra had just turned 5 and destroyed my science project the night before the county fair. I'd spent 2 weeks working on it, mapping lunar phases with a cardboard model that spun on a motor I wired myself. She'd torn off the moon cutouts and scribbled all over the charts with red marker. When I cried and showed our mom, she just said, "She's little, be the bigger person." So I went to the fair with a half-finished project and a sick feeling in my stomach. I didn't win. I didn't even place. Dad said, "Better luck next year." Mom gave me a pat on the shoulder. Sierra got a popsicle and a smile. By middle school, the gap between us was a canyon. I made honor roll every quarter, captained the robotics club, got invited to math camps. Sierra was skipping classes, stealing from kids' lockers, and sneaking out at night. But every time the school called, Mom would pull her into the kitchen and whisper, "It's okay, baby, we'll get through this. She's just under pressure. Puberty is hard." When I got into the summer program at Stanford the summer before 10th grade, I thought finally maybe they'd see me. It was competitive, only 3 kids in Oregon were selected. I got the letter in the mail, read it 10 times before running into the kitchen to tell them. Dad glanced up from his paper, said something about how expensive it would be. Mom barely looked up from peeling potatoes. "We'll see," she said. 2 weeks later, Sierra was caught smoking in the girls' bathroom at school. Not just cigarettes. Pot. She was suspended for a week and my parents were mortified. There were whispers in the neighborhood. Mom stopped going to Bible study. Dad canceled their dinner plans with another couple they saw every month. They found a program out in Bend. A youth rehab center with horses and group therapy and yoga. It wasn't cheap. I found the brochure in Mom's purse the night I overheard them arguing about money. Dad was saying something about dipping into the savings. She kept saying, "Sierra needs this." Then there was silence. The next morning they told me I couldn't go to Stanford. "Vivian, honey, your sister is going through a lot right now," Mom said, her voice like glass wrapped in tissue paper. "She needs help more than you need this camp." I didn't say anything. I didn't cry. I just nodded and took the letter off the fridge. That was the summer I started teaching myself how to code. I spent hours in the public library downtown using their old clunky PCs to download ebooks and free tutorials. I couldn't afford courses, but I had curiosity and a bottomless need to escape. I didn't talk to Sierra much that year. When she came back from the program, she was tanner, thinner, and somehow meaner. She liked to say things like, "Must be nice being perfect," or "Go ahead, rub your success in my face." I'd leave the room when she spoke like that. But she always made sure her words followed me down the hall. High school blurred by in a mix of late night sat prep and avoiding chaos. I got into Berkeley on a scholarship. When the acceptance came in, I brought the envelope into the kitchen, holding it like a fragile relic. Mom said, "That's nice, dear." Then she asked Sierra if she wanted leftover pizza or pasta for dinner. I kept the letter folded in my dresser for weeks before I told my friends. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a private note that no one in my house knew how to read. There was one night in senior year I remember more clearly than most. Sierra had taken Dad's truck and vanished for 2 days. No calls, no messages. When she finally came home, she reeked of cheap perfume and fast food. Dad was yelling, pacing in the driveway, slamming the door every few minutes. Mom sat at the kitchen table crying softly into her sleeve. I came down the stairs and stood in the hallway just watching. "Why do you keep saving her?" I asked. "She doesn't want help." "Because she's lost," Mom whispered. "And you don't need us like she does." I wanted to say I did. I wanted to scream that maybe I'd needed them for years, just in quieter ways. But I didn't. I just turned around and walked back upstairs. It wasn't just favoritism, it was something more corrosive. It was like they believed that loving me came second to fixing Sierra. Like they thought I would survive anything so they didn't have to try. That belief followed me into adulthood. It followed me into every boardroom where I had to prove I belonged. Into every pitch meeting where I had to explain twice as hard that I built this company myself. Into every holiday season where I pretended I didn't care I hadn't heard from them. I let them believe their silence didn't matter. I let it harden me. But tonight, standing on their porch and being handed cab fare, I realized something else. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had never chosen me to begin with. The day I left Portland for college, it rained. Not the kind of soft mist that usually fell in early spring, but a steady soaking downpour that made every sidewalk look like a mirror. My suitcase was already damp before I even made it to the bus station. No one offered to drive me. Dad said he had work at the hardware store. Mom claimed Sierra wasn't doing well, and she couldn't leave her alone. So I walked the 12 blocks to the Greyhound terminal dragging a suitcase I bought secondhand from Goodwill, its handle wrapped in duct tape. My shoes were soaked through by the time I got to the terminal. The woman behind the counter looked at me with something close to pity when I asked for a one-way ticket to Berkeley. That ride south felt like my first real breath in years. I stared out the window at forests giving way to open fields blurring into freeways as Oregon disappeared behind me. I had $72 in my wallet, a laptop that wheezed like it had asthma, and a scholarship that covered most of tuition but left little for anything else. But for the first time in a long time I felt weightless. UC Berkeley was a different world. It buzzed with energy I had only ever read about. People carried themselves like their ideas were worth listening to. I clung to every lecture, every lab session, every office hour, terrified I'd fall behind or be found out as someone who didn't belong. I studied late into the night at Doe Library, sleeping 3, maybe 4 hours at most. I worked part-time at a bookstore and then at a coffee cart off Telegraph Avenue, saving every tip and penny I could. Freshman year, I called home once a week. Sometimes Sierra would answer and say Mom wasn't around. Sometimes Dad would grunt a hello before passing the phone off. Most weeks the calls went to voicemail. I'd leave messages anyway. I told them about my classes, about the professors, about how my intro to programming course made me want to build things that lasted. By sophomore year, I stopped calling. They didn't notice. Senior year, I was one of 12 students accepted into an advanced AI research program. My professor pulled me aside after class and said, "Vivian, if you want to change the world, you're on the right track." I smiled, thanked her, and went home to my off-campus apartment where the walls were thin and the radiator only worked when it felt like it. I sat on the floor and cried. Not because I felt proud, but because there was no one to tell. I mailed a graduation invitation to my parents 3 months before the ceremony. I included directions, parking information, even a map of the campus. The day came and went. I kept glancing into the crowd from the stage, hoping I might see them sitting somewhere in the back. They didn't come. They didn't call. I checked the mail that summer. No card, no letter, nothing. The week after graduation, I got a job as a junior developer at a struggling software firm in Emeryville. It paid just enough to cover rent and ramen. I stayed a year long enough to learn what not to do when managing people. Then I quit and spent the next 3 months freelancing out of coffee shops and public libraries building apps. No one used writing code for clients who ghosted me on payments. That fall, I met Jenna Quinn in a meetup group for women in tech. She was smart, direct, and had the kind of natural leadership I envied. We started talking after an event about machine learning applications in healthcare. She mentioned an idea she'd been sketching out for a platform that could help hospitals manage predictive diagnostics. I'd been working on a similar algorithm in my spare time. We met for coffee the next week. Then again. Then every week after that. In 2015, we pooled what little savings we had and rented a tiny studio apartment in the Mission District with peeling linoleum floors and a window that wouldn't close all the way. The space was too small for 2 desks, so we rotated who got the table and who sat on the floor. We coded 12-14 hours a day. We skipped meals to pay for hosting services. We pitched to investors who smiled politely and said we were early or too niche or just not ready. Most nights I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling wondering if I'd made a mistake. I hadn't heard from my parents in over 2 years. Sierra had blocked me on social media after a brief argument about her 3rd DUI. I had no safety net, no one I could call if this all collapsed. But failure wasn't an option. Brightcap didn't have a name back then. It was just lines of code and a dream scribbled across whiteboards in dry erase marker that constantly ran out of ink. We built the first prototype in 6 months. A hospital in Oakland agreed to pilot it, and it worked. Not flawlessly, but well enough to prove the concept. Word spread. A second hospital called. Then a third. By the end of 2016, we raised our first round of seed funding. A modest $200,000, but to us, it felt like $1 million. I didn't call home to tell them. I wasn't sure they'd understand. Or worse, I was afraid they'd tell me it still wasn't enough. The call came just after 1 a.m. My phone lit up on the nightstand, vibrating against the wood. I didn't recognize the number at first, but something about the area code made my stomach twist. Oregon. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Viv came, a shaky voice, almost a whisper. I sat up. Sierra. She was crying. Not the theatrical kind she used in high school to get out of trouble, but something raw, panicked. I could hear traffic behind her, the echo of distant voices. He hit me. I don't know where I am. I think he took my phone. I borrowed someone's, please. I didn't know who else to call. I was silent for a beat. I hadn't heard her voice in over 3 years. Where are you? I don't know. Somewhere off I-5, a gas station. There's a yellow sign. I think it says Medford. I didn't ask questions. I told her to stay put and texted Jenna to let her know I'd be working remotely for a few days. Then I booked Sierra a hotel room near the airport in Medford and a morning flight to San Francisco. I arranged for a car to pick her up and bring her to my apartment in Soma. I spent the rest of the night cleaning, changing sheets, stocking the fridge. She arrived late the next morning. Hair tangled, makeup smeared. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest like she was holding herself together. I hadn't seen her in person since she was 27. She looked older than 30 should look. Tired. Hollowed out. She didn't hug me. Just walked inside, dropped her duffel on the floor, and went straight to the guest room. I left her alone for the first day. Bought groceries. Left clean clothes folded on the bed. I ordered takeout and let her choose the movie that night. She barely touched the food. She didn't speak much either. On the second day, she started talking. Short sentences at first. The boyfriend had been controlling for a while. She'd tried to leave before. He always found her. She had nowhere else to go. She knew I had a spare room. I nodded and said she could stay as long as she needed. On the third day, I gave her access to the apartment gym, added her to the building's guest list, left her a key. I even gave her a company expense card to use for groceries and essentials. It had a modest limit. I didn't think twice. She smiled for the first time that night. Said thanks like it was a word she wasn't used to saying. That weekend, I came home from a pitch meeting to find shopping bags all over the kitchen counter. Designer names. Labels still attached. My laptop opened to an email confirmation from a ticketing site. I checked the transaction history. The expense card had been maxed out. 2 front-row concert tickets. A pair of leather boots. A $300 skincare bundle. I waited until she came out of the shower, towel wrapped around her head, humming to herself like she was on vacation. "We need to talk," I said. She rolled her eyes before I even finished the sentence. "Seriously, I thought this place was all about female empowerment or whatever. You said I could use the card. For essentials, Sierra, not to blow hundreds on bags and floor seats." She scoffed. "Maybe you should have been more clear. Or maybe you just like pretending to help people so you can feel like the good sister." I stared at her, unsure whether to feel angrier or just sad. "You lied to me. You used me." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Please. You're just a walking ATM with boundaries. A charity case with conditions. If I didn't play the victim, you'd never let me in." My jaw clenched. I couldn't look at her. I walked to the hallway closet, grabbed her duffel bag, and started tossing in her things. "Seriously, you're kicking me out. You stole from me." She followed me into the bedroom, voice rising. "You think you're better than everyone because you made some app and got lucky. But you've always needed me to be the mess so you could play hero." I stopped, turned to face her. "I don't need you to be anything, Sierra. I just finally stopped trying to fix something that never wanted fixing." She stared at me, eyes wide and cold. Then she grabbed her bag, shoved her things in, and left without another word. She didn't take the tickets. The next morning, I canceled the card, changed the building access code, and blocked her number. I waited for the fallout. A call from my parents. A guilt-laced message. But the silence stayed. And I realized I wasn't angry. I was done. Under the warm hum of my kitchen lights, I brewed coffee I didn't need and stared at the back of the front door, half expecting Sierra to return and pound her fist against it. But she didn't. The apartment was still eerily, so as if her presence had never been here at all. The next morning, I shut down the guest code on the building's front entry system, canceled the expense card, and replaced the lock on my personal office. By the end of the day, it was like she'd never stepped foot in my space. I deleted her contact. I archived every message. I didn't want reminders. Not anymore. About a month passed. Then one Tuesday afternoon, while reviewing product launch projections with my strategy team, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown Oregon number. I turned it face down and finished the meeting. When I checked it later, there was a voicemail. "Vivian, this is Malcolm Foster. I'm sure you remember me. I worked with your father years ago on some estate matters. I'm calling because your father recently updated his will, and I thought it would be right to inform you of the changes directly. I'm in Portland. Let me know if you'd like to talk. I believe you deserve to hear it in full." For a second, I just stood there in my office, motionless, phone still in my hand. The last time I saw Malcolm, I was a teenager. He'd come by the house once, some paperwork involving my grandfather's property. He had kind eyes and a voice like he had spent his entire life avoiding unnecessary conflict. I remembered thinking he looked too gentle to deal with my father's intensity. I returned the call that evening. "Vivian, thank you for calling back," he said. "I hope you're well." "What's going on?" I asked, skipping pleasantries. "Your father made several amendments to his estate plan last month. One of those included the removal of your name as a beneficiary." I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. Not surprised, just hollow. "And I suppose Sierra gets everything." "That's correct. The house bank assets, the life insurance payout. All of it." There was a pause, the kind that stretches just long enough for someone to consider offering comfort but not quite commit. "It's not a large estate," he added. "But I felt you should know. I advised him to speak to you directly." He declined. "Of course he did," I muttered, half to myself. "I appreciate the call, Mr. Foster. Vivian, you deserve better than silence." I ended the call, set the phone down on the kitchen counter, and stared at the half-full glass of water I had poured before dialing. I wasn't thirsty anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. But I felt something colder than either of those. Not being included in the will wasn't about the money. I had more than enough. My portfolio could fund a dozen retirements. It was about erasure. It was about being deliberately written out of your own bloodline like a character removed from a family tree. Later that night, I met Ethan for dinner. We sat at our usual table at a bistro tucked into the corner of Jackson Square, the kind of place with soft lighting and waiters who remembered your drink order. He could tell something was off the second I sat down. "You look like you didn't sleep." I stirred the lemon into my iced tea, watching the slices spin. My father updated his will, took me out of it entirely. Ethan leaned back, folding his hands together. Did he at least have the decency to tell you himself? Nope. Malcolm called me, said he tried to convince my dad to inform me, but of course he didn't want to deal with the conversation. Ethan was quiet for a while, letting the weight settle. Do you want to contest it? I shook my head. I don't want anything from him. I just didn't expect it to hit this way. I haven't needed their support in years, but knowing you've been legally written out of your family, that's a different kind of final. Ethan looked down at the table, then back at me. What do you want to do? I exhaled slowly. Honestly, I want to outbuild them. Outlast them. I want the next time they hear my name to be on a Times Square billboard they didn't pay for. I want them to realize they threw away something they can never get back. Ethan offered a slow nod, then picked up his fork. Then let's make sure they see it. Back at my apartment, I opened my old storage drive and clicked through folders I hadn't touched in years. Photos from Berkeley, the first whiteboard sketch of Brightcap's original architecture, my pitch deck from the pre-seed round. There was one image that stopped me cold. A scan of my Stanford summer program acceptance letter from high school. The one they refused to fund. I stared at it for a long moment, then closed the folder. By the end of that week, Brightcap secured its Series C funding at a $1 billion valuation. Jenna and I celebrated quietly in our conference room with boxed sushi and sparkling water, both too tired for champagne. After the team left, I sat alone at the window watching the Bay Bridge lights flicker across the water. My phone buzzed again with another Oregon number. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I was building something they could never take credit for, and I would do it without their names ever touching mine again. ChatGPT said. On a cold morning in early January, Ethan showed up outside my office with 2 coffees, no warning, no text. He stood there with that quiet confidence of his, wearing a navy peacoat and a look that said he already knew I'd be too busy to eat breakfast. I opened the door and stepped aside. He handed me the extra-large cup just the way I liked it, black splash of oat milk, no sugar, and didn't say a word. That's how he was. He never demanded space in my life. He simply made himself available and stayed whether I needed to vent about procurement delays or sit in silence after getting bad news from a hospital partner. He wasn't trying to fix anything, he just didn't leave. And after years of people walking away, that alone carried more weight than any grand gesture. We had been circling something more than friendship for a while, both of us too careful, too burned from old scars to call it what it was. He had been part of my legal team 3 years earlier during that brutal investor lawsuit that almost cost me control of Brightcap. Even then, he was different. He listened more than he talked. He didn't just ask what I wanted to win, he asked what I was willing to lose. Now he waited quietly at the corner of my desk while I skimmed through final edits on our Series C investor brief. I paused mid-sentence and looked up at him. You know you don't have to keep showing up like this. I know, he said, sipping his own coffee. But I want to. A week later, he stayed over for the first time. It was unceremonious. We had both fallen asleep watching an old documentary about system failures in medical software. One of our engineers had recommended it. When I woke up, it was morning, and his arm was still draped over my waist, his breathing slow and even. I didn't panic. I didn't question it. I just lay there for a moment, watching the morning light crawl through the curtains, and felt a kind of quiet I hadn't known I missed. That weekend, I told him the full story about the will. I didn't leave out the part where Malcolm called or how I hadn't cried when I heard I'd been erased. I told him how I had once kept my Stanford summer program acceptance letter in my dresser like a secret trophy never shown to anyone in the house because no one had asked. He sat beside me on the floor of my living room, his back against the couch, fingers loosely wrapped around a glass of bourbon. "So they rewrote the ending and cut your name out," he said. "Doesn't mean you weren't the best part of the story." I stared at him for a long moment, then leaned my head on his shoulder. By the end of February, our Series C funding was official. Brightcap's valuation hit $1 billion. Jenna and I celebrated quietly with our core team, some takeout, a group toast, no flashy party. It felt right that way. We had built this thing in long hours, small rooms with no fanfare and very few believers. The moment belonged to the people who had stayed through every system crash and investor pitch gone sideways. Ethan picked me up afterward and we drove out of the city toward the Marin Headlands. I needed space to breathe, to process what this milestone meant. He knew without me saying. We parked near the overlook, wind howling against the cliffs. I stepped out and wrapped my coat tighter, walking toward the edge where the city lights blinked faintly through the low clouds. It felt like watching my entire past from a distance. "They'll see this on the news," I said, not turning around. "My parents. My sister. There's no way they won't hear about the valuation." Ethan joined me at the railing, hands in his pockets. "And what do you want them to feel when they do?" I thought about it. Not revenge, not pain. Just clarity. I want them to know that I did it without them. That they had the chance to stand beside me and they chose not to. And now I get to choose not to let them back in. Ethan nodded. "That's not cold. That's clean." I laughed, surprised by the word. "You don't think it's harsh number? You've carried that weight long enough. You get to set it down now." We stood there in silence, wind tearing through our coats, the city blinking behind us. Somewhere far below, waves hit the rocks, steady and unforgiving. Back in the car, I looked at my phone. 2 missed calls from an Oregon number I didn't recognize and 1 text from an unknown sender. "Congrats. Saw the news. Hope you're doing well." I showed Ethan the screen. "You think that's Sierra?" He raised an eyebrow. "If it is, that's the shortest apology I've ever seen." I blocked the number and turned the phone off. "You sure?" he asked. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The IPO plan started to move faster after that. Jenna brought in a consulting firm to streamline our internal systems and prep our team for the next stage. We flew to New York twice that spring, meeting with analysts, drafting early prospectus material, managing new investors' expectations. The stakes grew higher, so did the noise. But through it all, Ethan was there. Not as a lawyer, not as a fixer, just as someone who stayed, and in a life full of people who made exit wounds that meant everything. We were 3 weeks out from announcing the IPO when Jenna knocked on my office door with that expression she reserved for news that wasn't urgent but definitely wouldn't wait. "Got a minute?" she asked. I looked up from the compliance memo I had been reviewing and nodded. She stepped in, closed the door, and laid her tablet down on my desk without saying anything. It was a screenshot of a tweet dated 2 years earlier. Sierra's handle unmistakable, even though the username was now changed. Her profile picture was a filtered selfie I hadn't seen before, but the post left no room for confusion. Some people build their empires on the backs of other people's pain. My startup idea. My ex. My trauma. All stolen, all monetized. But sure, let's keep pretending she's a hero. I didn't speak. Jenna swiped again, revealing another. She never had a vision. Just a well-connected boyfriend and a checklist of people to step over. Another one from an anonymous blog post, now archived but easily traceable through metadata. I worked under her for 3 months. The environment was toxic. She used vulnerability as a tool. She's not who you think she is. I sat back, eyes still on the screen. "Where did this come from?" Media audit team flagged it during the routine risk sweep, Jenna said. They were digging through possible issues ahead of the press cycle. Most of it's old, nothing ever gained traction. But one of our contacts at the Times passed it along this morning. Said Diane Ellis is looking into it. Diane Ellis. The reporter known for hard-hitting profiles of female CEOs, usually with one eyebrow raised. Fair but sharp, her pieces didn't sink ships, but they cracked hulls. I rubbed my forehead. Is Diane the one asking questions or being fed stories? Both, Jenna said. From what I hear, she doesn't take anonymous posts seriously. But Sierra tagged her directly in one last year. Said she had the real story behind Brightcap's origin. That one I remembered. It came after I refused to reply to Sierra's email asking for money. I had ignored it then like I did all of her messages. Now it was resurfacing. I stared out the window watching a crane swing slowly over the skyline. Legally, it's defamation, I said. Every bit of it is a lie. We could take her to court and win without blinking. Jenna sat down across from me. I know, but that's not the real issue. What if the story's already been told? Even if no one believed it, it exists. And that means we can't ignore it anymore. Not with the visibility we're about to have. I let that sit between us. I had built Brightcap from nothing. I had coded the first prototype, pitched every round, bled into every deadline. But all it would take was one whisper, well-placed and amplified, to cast doubt. Especially because I was a woman. Especially because I was younger than most of the founders going public in our sector. I can handle noise, I said. Jenna leaned forward. You shouldn't have to handle it alone. I didn't say anything. She tapped the tablet again and turned it toward herself. What if we got ahead of it? Not defensive, not legal. Just open. You want me to give a response? I want you to tell the truth, she said. Not because we owe Sierra anything, but because there's power in controlling your own narrative. And you think people care? I think people who've been erased their whole lives will care a hell of a lot. She was right, and I hated that she was right. I sat with it for a day. Then another. I pulled up the posts again, read every sentence Sierra had written. They weren't just digs. They were accusations laced with the exact kind of vague trauma language designed to imply more than they said. The insinuation was clear: I had taken what wasn't mine. I had stepped on others to get ahead. And because I had never publicly explained how Brightcap started, people could believe it. The next morning, I called Diane Ellis myself. She answered on the second ring. I introduced myself and told her I had heard she was looking into my past. She didn't deny it. I'm always looking, she said. But I only write what I can prove. Good, then let me help you do that. I offered to meet. She chose a coffee shop in the inner Richmond, low profile but well lit. We sat at a corner table, no PR handler, no legal rep. Just her and me. I told her how I learned to code in a public library when my family refused to pay for a summer program. I told her about the nights on the apartment floor with Jenna, the early rejections, the failures no one ever wrote about. I didn't talk about Sierra, but I did talk about truth. About women who build in silence and get questioned in volume. About how easy it is to doubt a woman's success when she doesn't explain every single brick in her foundation. Diane listened. She asked tough questions. She didn't smile often. At the end, she closed her notebook and looked at me. If I write this, it won't be flattering. But it will be fair. That's all I want. Jenna read the draft 3 days later and nodded once. We're not doing this to answer Sierra, she said. We're doing it so every woman who's ever been accused of being too ambitious knows she's not alone. I stared at the article's title on my screen. More Than a Founder: The Woman Behind Brightcap. Then I closed my laptop and exhaled. The calendar read 6 days until the IPO when Jenna walked into my office holding her phone like it was radioactive. She didn't sit. She didn't even speak at first. Just placed the phone down in front of me, speaker on, a voicemail queued up. I pressed play. Hi Jenna, this is Meredith Prescott. I'm Vivian's mother. I'm calling because we've been seeing a lot of the media buzz around the IPO and thought it might be, well, a nice opportunity for the family to be present. I was wondering if there's a way for us to join Vivian on stage or maybe at the press event. Something symbolic, you know. A show of support. I think it would mean a lot. Let me know. The message ended. Jenna didn't say a word. I stared at the phone. Then leaned back slowly in my chair. They really think this is their moment, I said, the words half laugh, half disbelief. Jenna raised her eyebrows slightly. I figured you'd want to hear it from her directly. I picked up my mug and took a long sip of coffee. It had gone cold, but I didn't care. You know what's funny? I remember being 17 and overhearing my mother on the phone with her friend from church. I had just gotten into Berkeley. She said, "She's book smart, but she's not really cut out for big things. I don't think she'll handle the pressure." Jenna sat down across from me waiting. Then at graduation, I sent them an invitation. Neither of them showed. But now with cameras coming and networks watching, suddenly they're interested. "She said it would be symbolic," Jenna said carefully. "Oh, it would be," I said smiling. "Symbolic of exactly what I built in spite of them." I stood and walked to the window. The city below buzzed with its usual mid-morning rhythm, but in that moment it felt like something sharper was pulsing beneath it. A long thread of history woven tight with silence, resentment, and unmet longing. 10 years ago they told me I was an embarrassment, I said quietly. Sierra was the daughter worth defending, worth helping. I was the reminder that effort doesn't guarantee love. Jenna said nothing. Now they want to share a stage with me. Not because they're proud. Because the spotlight finally turned warm. I turned around. Number. Just no. Absolutely not. They don't get to rewrite the ending. Not this time. Jenna nodded. Understood. I'll handle it. She stood and headed for the door but paused with her hand on the frame. You know people are going to ask why they're not there. Let them ask, I said. I'd rather face those questions than let my name be a shield for theirs. She left and I sank into my chair, not exhausted, just hollow. A familiar ache filled my chest, not quite sadness, not quite rage, just the slow, steady grief of someone who had hoped too long for things to be different. That afternoon, the executive team met in the large conference room. We went through final logistics, security protocols, guest lists, press access. Jenna kept things moving smoothly, but I caught her glance once across the table. The kind of look that asked if I was sure. I nodded once. She didn't bring it up again. After the meeting, as the team filtered out, a junior coordinator leaned in and asked if my family needed special seating arrangements for the event. I shook my head. There won't be family attending. Oh, she said, flustered. Okay. I just assumed. It's a fair assumption, I said gently. But not this time. That night, Ethan came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. I told him about the voicemail while we sat cross-legged on the couch, curtains open between us. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then quietly. That's bold even for them. I know. Do you want to respond? Number. I want them to wonder. He smiled, not in amusement but in agreement. They think your success means you've forgotten. They don't realize it's the reason you remember everything. I looked at him, then really looked. The way his presence didn't demand, the way he saw without prying, the way he stayed day after day without needing to be asked. They'll regret it, he said softly. Maybe. But that's not my problem anymore. I clinked my wine glass against his, took a sip, and leaned back into the silence we both understood. The following morning, I walked into the office early just as the sun began to stretch its light across the water. On my desk was a printout of the final stage design for the IPO ceremony. The center was clean, no extra chairs, no family section. Just me, alone. And for once that didn't feel lonely at all. The lights backstage were too bright. I could feel their heat along my spine as I waited behind the curtain, hands folded loosely in front of me. My name echoed across the ballroom from the host's voice, confident and reverent, as if he'd practiced the phrasing all morning. I stepped forward. The main hall of the Moscone Center was packed, every seat taken. Camera flashes sparked in the distance like fireflies. The BrightCap logo floated high behind me in clean, bold lettering. The air pulsed with energy, investors, press partners, employees, all waiting for the moment they could say they witnessed history. And I was alone on stage. Exactly the way I intended. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and let the applause settle. I didn't rush. I had rehearsed this speech for months, edited it a dozen times. But now, standing there in heels that pinched slightly at the toe, I felt calm. Good morning, I began, scanning the rows of faces. Thank you for being here. I know you've already heard a lot today about numbers, projections, trends, expectations. But I want to take a few minutes to talk about something else. I want to talk about beginnings. I paused. Because none of this started with capital. None of this started in a boardroom. This began in a studio apartment with cracked walls and unreliable Wi-Fi. It began with nights spent debugging until the sun rose with rejections from people who didn't think women built things that lasted. It began for me at a front door where my father handed me cab fare instead of a welcome. There were murmurs in the audience. Not gasps, not discomfort, just the subtle shift when people realize they're being told the truth. When I started BrightCap, I didn't have legacy behind me. I didn't have family cheering from the sidelines. I had doubt. And necessity. And a stubborn refusal to let either define me. Some of you may know the valuation we reached this quarter. Some of you may have read the articles or seen the headlines. But numbers don't tell you how many times I nearly quit. They don't show you the people who stood beside me when no one else did. I turned slightly to the left side of the audience where I knew my team was seated: Jenna, our engineers, our earliest hires. This company is what it is because of the people who believed in building something better even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. I took a slow breath and reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. Now I'd like to tell you what I plan to do with my shares. A ripple moved through the audience. As of this morning, I've signed over 100% of my personal equity, $380 million, to an endowment under Women Rise, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. This gift will establish a grant program, mentorship network, and legal fund to help women who've been excluded, silenced, or told they're too much to lead. I let that settle. A hush blanketed the room. None of this money will go to my family. They had their chance. Many chances. They chose not to see me when I needed them most. And now I choose not to include them in the life I built without them. For the first time since I began speaking, the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was the kind of raw guttural sound that vibrates through your ribs. People stood. Some clapped. Some cheered. Some simply watched, stunned. I stood at the podium and took them all in. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just felt still. This was not about bitterness. It was not about punishment. It was about boundaries that had been earned through years of silence and fire. I finished the rest of the speech shorter now about the future of BrightCap, the vision for ethical AI, the role of accessibility in healthcare tech. But I knew what they would remember. What they would carry from that stage. Afterward, reporters swarmed, flashes popping like strobe lights. I saw Diane Ellis standing near the edge of the stage, nodding once approvingly. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Jenna found me backstage, her eyes wide. That was bold, that was overdue. She hugged me once quickly and disappeared to manage the next wave of interviews. Ethan was waiting by the exit, tie loosened hands in his pockets, watching me like I was still the woman who sat across from him in silence with her heart taped together. "You did it," he said. "I didn't do it to prove anything." "I know." I walked past him toward the quiet hallway that led to the private lounge, heels clicking against marble. My body ached. My voice was scratchy. But something in me felt lighter than it ever had. I didn't look for my parents in the crowd. I knew they weren't there. They would see the headlines later. And this time I wouldn't be the one left waiting for a call that never came. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in years. Charles Prescott. I stared at the screen for a moment, not surprised, not curious, just still. I didn't answer. Let it ring until it cut off, then watched as a voicemail icon appeared. A minute later, a short text followed. Didn't expect that move. Think we should talk. There it was. The great reckoning they assumed was still available. As if years of absence could be bridged with 8 words and a period. I didn't reply. The next morning, an envelope arrived at the office, forwarded from BrightCap's legal inbox. Pale blue, smooth to the touch, and addressed in my mother's careful, cursive round loops, and even slant like she had practiced for years. She always insisted on sending physical cards, even when email was faster. Even when she knew I wouldn't write back. I took it to my office and shut the door. Inside was a folded sheet of stationery faintly scented with lavender. Vivian, I watched the announcement. I saw your speech. I barely recognized you. You were strong, beautiful, so composed. I know we haven't been there the way you probably wanted. I can't say we were perfect, but we've always loved you even if it didn't look like what you needed. I didn't know things had gone so far. I didn't think you meant to shut us out for good. We're still your family. That hasn't changed. Love, Mom. No apology, no ownership. Just an echo of the same sentiment I had heard since I was a teenager, passive regret masked as concern rewritten as care. Later that day, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it ring. Voicemail. Hey, it's me. Sierra. I saw what you did. The speech. The donation. I mean, I knew you were serious about boundaries, but you really didn't hold back, huh? She laughed, not warmly. Look, I get it. You're mad. I screwed up. We all did. But come on, Viv. You didn't have to drag the whole family through the mud to make a point. I mean, we're still sisters. Right. There was a pause before she added one more line. You made your point, loud and clear. Maybe it's time to stop punishing people. I deleted the message and powered off the phone. The silence after was exactly what I needed. That Sunday, Ethan and I went for a walk through Golden Gate Park. It was early May and the roses in the botanical garden had just started blooming blush and crimson like fire spun in silk. We walked quietly for most of the morning, passing joggers, young families, older couples with matching hats and long histories. Eventually, we found an empty bench beneath a massive oak. I pulled the letter from my jacket pocket, the pale blue standing out against the worn wood. He glanced at it but didn't speak. They've all reached out now, I said finally. One text. One letter. One voicemail. Ethan nodded slowly. What do you want to do? Nothing. Because you're angry, number. Because I'm done needing them to understand. I traced the edge of the envelope with my thumb. For years, I wanted something from them. Recognition. An apology. Just a moment of real acknowledgement. But now that they're reaching out, I don't feel angry. I feel distant. Like they're just names I used to carry. Not people I still belong to. That's not harsh, Ethan said. That's healthy. They'll say I cut them off. That I was cruel. They'll make it sound like I woke up one day and decided to erase them. But they were erasing me for years. Quietly. Consistently. Now they don't like the silence. I looked at him, searching for any sign of doubt. There wasn't any. You don't have to respond, he said. Not even to explain. That's the part that feels strange. For so long I felt like I owed them a conversation. But now I see this as the closure. We sat for a while watching two kids try to fly a kite in the breeze. It lifted once, then dipped. Then rose again. That night I took the letter home. I didn't burn it. I didn't frame it. I placed it carefully back in its envelope, sealed it, and slid it into a larger manila folder. On the front I wrote one name. Malcolm Foster. I didn't include a return address, just his. He would know what to do with it. He always had. As I dropped it in the mail chute in my lobby, I didn't feel triumphant. Just certain. There would be no reunions. No tearful calls. No speeches about forgiveness at kitchen tables that never welcomed me in the first place. They had their chances. And I had finally chosen myself. By the time July arrived, San Francisco was drenched in its usual fog, the kind that rolled down from the hills and wrapped the city in quiet. I spent most mornings at my apartment answering emails from the nonprofit's legal team, reviewing grant criteria, finalizing partnerships. The Vivian Fund was almost ready. The paperwork had been filed, the endowment seated with the initial transfer from my Brightcap shares. The website had a landing page, the kind that didn't need fanfare. It simply stated what we did: support women who had been cast aside by the very people who were supposed to love them. I didn't want a press conference. I didn't want a spotlight. The whole point was to shift the light to someone else. But the news still spread. Word got out through a few nonprofit leaders in the Bay Area, some of whom had worked with Jenna in the past. One of them tweeted about our mission. Within 24 hours, the site crashed from the surge of traffic. I received over 500 messages in the first week. Women from Detroit, Tulsa, Phoenix, rural Ohio, West LA. Some were brief, "I wish this existed when I was 19. I left home at 15. Never looked back. You gave me language for something I've never been able to name." Others came with stories that shook me. A woman in Florida whose parents forced her into debt for her brother's legal bills then called her ungrateful when she moved out. A woman in Washington who was told not to apply to college so she could stay home and raise her sister's baby. A woman who became the first in her family to earn a PhD only to be accused of abandoning them. None of them wanted pity. They just wanted to be seen. Jenna called one morning, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. "I think this is bigger than we thought." "I know," I said. "I feel it too." 2 days later, I got an email from Diane Ellis. She had kept her distance since the IPO. I respected that. But now her message was simple. "Vivian, I've launched a long-form podcast, one guest at a time, deep conversations. I'd love to talk with you. Not about the company, about the fund, the why, no pressure. But the mic is yours if you want it." I stared at the message for a long time. I hadn't done a sit-down interview since the IPO press run. Most of them were clipped, rehearsed, filtered through the lens of market confidence. But this felt different. I wrote back the same day, "Let's talk." We met the following week at a small recording studio tucked between 2 buildings in the Mission. No entourage. No lighting crew. Just Diane, 2 mics, and a producer in the next room. She poured us both water, adjusted her headphones, and leaned into the mic. "Vivian, welcome. Thanks for having me." "So, the Vivian Fund. Why now?" I thought for a second before answering. Because for a long time I told myself I didn't need anything from the past. But the truth is I needed to build something I never had. A place where women who've been pushed out by their own families can walk in and feel like they belong without having to earn it first. She nodded. "What was missing for you?" "It wasn't money. It wasn't even support. It was safety. The kind where you can tell the truth and not have it used against you. The kind where love doesn't expire when you make a mistake." "And you didn't have that." I paused. "There are children who grow up in homes where they are always the problem to be solved, the shadow behind someone else's light. They learn to apologize for existing too loudly, for asking too much. They carry it into adulthood, and when they succeed, people act like that wound never existed. But it does. Did the success make it easier? Number. It just made the silence harder to explain." Diane gave me space, didn't fill the air with unnecessary reactions. When the interview ended, she stood and shook my hand. "Thank you for trusting the room," she said quietly. That night the episode aired. The response was immediate and overwhelming. It wasn't about the numbers, though it did hit the top spot on several platforms. It was the messages. I listened with my daughter. She cried. So did I. "My father sent me away at 16. I haven't told anyone. Until now." You said the thing I've never had the courage to say. The next morning, I walked into our new office space in the Dogpatch district. It smelled like fresh paint and new furniture. A stack of grant applications sat near the window beside unopened boxes of donated laptops. I stood in the middle of the room, listening to nothing but the distant hum of the city waking up. No applause, no headlines, just quiet. And for once that felt like everything I'd ever wanted. The morning of my 35th birthday started quiet. No emails, no meetings. Just the soft hum of the city outside and the smell of coffee filling the kitchen. I hadn't planned a party or a dinner. I didn't want a celebration, I just wanted space. Stillness. The kind of day where nothing pressed in. Ethan had already gone out for a run, promising to bring back breakfast from the corner cafe we both liked. I opened the windows, let the breeze move through the apartment, then settled into my armchair with a book I had been meaning to finish for weeks. That's when I saw the package. It had been slipped through the front door slot, resting neatly against the baseboard like it had been delivered with purpose. No postage. No courier stamp. Just my name in careful cursive across the center. My mother's handwriting. For a moment, I just stared at it heart still. Then I walked over, picked it up, and brought it to the kitchen table. It was light, thin, the kind of envelope that carried emotion more than weight. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph. I knew it instantly. It was me, age 7 or 8, sitting cross-legged on the old porch in Portland, a stack of books in my lap, a proud gap-toothed smile stretched across my face. My hair was in 2 uneven braids. I was wearing the hand-me-down sweatshirt I used to live in. I hadn't seen the photo in decades, but the moment I held it, I remembered everything. On the back, written in ink that had slightly smudged over time, was one sentence. "You were always brilliant." I just didn't know how to say it. No greeting, no explanation, no apology. Just that. I read it again and again. Then I placed the photo down and walked to the window. Outside, the fog had started to lift. The skyline looked sharper in the light. I wrapped my arms around myself and stood still for a long time. When Ethan returned, I was still at the window. He set the paper bag on the counter and walked over. "Hey. You okay?" I nodded. "She sent something." He didn't ask who. He already knew. "A photo. From when I was a kid." She wrote on the back. "Do you want to talk about it?" I thought for a moment, then turned to face him. "Not really. It's not that I'm upset. It's just, I don't need anything from it. Not anymore." He nodded and placed a gentle hand on my back. We sat on the couch together, splitting a croissant in silence. The photo lay on the table in front of us, its edges slightly curled from age. I looked at it one last time, then picked it up and slid it into a drawer. I didn't want it framed. I didn't want it on display. But I didn't want to throw it away either. Later that afternoon, I wrote a letter. Just one line. "I forgive you. But I won't be coming back." I placed it in a blank envelope, addressed it to Malcolm Foster's office in Portland. No return address. No salutation. I knew he'd understand. That evening we walked through the Presidio trails. The sun was low, painting everything gold. We stopped at a clearing that overlooked the water. A group of kids played soccer nearby. A man played guitar quietly under a tree. I took a deep breath and let it all go. The noise. The hurt. The version of me that had waited for them to come around. None of it was mine to carry anymore. We stood there for a while, just watching the horizon shift. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Back at home, I made tea while Ethan opened the windows again, letting in the last of the day's air. We moved slowly, deliberately. The kind of rhythm that only comes when you've stopped running. Before bed, I tucked the letter into my bag to mail in the morning. I didn't cry. I didn't hesitate. I just felt done. Not with resentment, but with the idea that their approval had anything to do with my peace. That night, as I turned off the lights and crawled into bed, Ethan wrapped an arm around me. "Happy birthday," he whispered. "Thanks," I said. And I meant it. If you've ever had to walk away from people who couldn't see you, if you've ever learned how to build your own light when theirs ran cold, tell me. Tell me your story in the comments. I'll be here listening.